Welcome to Slimehouse, a podcast defining a genre of crude humor, outrageous hijinks, and mild language. Earlier this month, as part of our spooky slime series, we covered the 1987 film The Monster Squad. And then we found out that a new documentary about its fandom called Wolfman's Got Nards is coming to VOD on October 27th. The documentary's director, Andre Gower, also plays Sean, the protagonist in the original film. In this special interview, we chat with Andre about making The Monster Squad, directing the new documentary, and how this particular movie and its passionate fandom shaped his life, career, and love of movies. Enjoy the interview, and afterwards, please be sure to rent Wolfman's Got Nards, now available on VOD on all major platforms.
Andre, thanks for being with us. I had a first question for you. Bouncing off the documentary, we want more information about your background with like getting involved in the film. Did anything particularly draw you to it when you auditioned for it? How did you first hear about it? And what was your first initial experiences meeting Shane and Fred?
Well, I remember most of it pretty well. A lot of people that are Monster Squad fans or know the movie may or may not know the kind of funny audition sequence, because I actually never auditioned for the role of Sean. I actually auditioned, screen tested all the way through the process for the role of Rudy. And for an understandable reason, I guess, my body of work just prior to casting of Monster Squad, I was playing roles where I was the cool kid with the great hair and a lot of hair product and, leather jacket maybe. And obviously it was an easy kind of submission. Just go read for this role. And then that's all I did. I read for Rudy. I never read one bit of dialogue for Sean. And, weeks later you get that call and be like, hey, you got cast in that movie. And usually the response is, which one? Because, back in that day, you're reading for maybe one or two a day or three a week, or, in TV shows, and it's just crazy. And there's that one, the monster movie with the thing. And I'm like, great. And like, yeah, but not the role that you actually auditioned for. And usually that's really bad news, right? You're like, oh, shit. Like, man, like it usually means a much smaller role. If you don't get the role you read for, but they kind of like you, so they give you something. And like, no, you got, they actually cast you in the lead, like straight out. And I'm like, no, Rudy's the cool character. And, so I was a little bummed. But that lasted all but, maybe a day or something, when you realize that was a good thing, totally the right call. And I know the reason now why that happened. And, could I have played Rudy? Sure. Would it have been fun and campy? Could I had some style and attitude? Sure. Would I have been good as Ryan Lambert as Rudy? No. Ryan Lambert is Rudy. He rocked the shit out of that audition. I know that's why, I know the story when he walked into the final audition, and why he, it's like, sometimes people just nail auditions, and like, that's the guy. Duncan Regehr did that with Dracula. I know that story too. And, luckily they saw something. They're like, oh, well, let's, cut Andre's hair and wash all that gunk out of it, and make him look a little dorkier and a little younger, and he can just be Sean. And so that was a tough haircut. So, that was sort of the kind of, beginnings of being associated with this film. And, then you meet Fred, and, you meet these guys, Shane, are kind of cool young dudes, like still right out of college age. And then you just start shooting this giant movie with a bunch of kids and animals and monsters and creature effects and explosions. And it's insane.
So bouncing off that, like, were you drawn to horror movies growing up, and that was part of the appeal of the auditioning for the film to you?
I think it was interesting, one, because it was it was a fairly large, budget studio movie, for back in the day. And you read the script and you know what they were doing. It was the classic monsters kind of told current. battling a group of kids have to battle them and save the day and save their kind of, save the world from Dracula and these classic monsters. I had grown up knowing and liking a lot of the classic movies and of course the stories. I was always a Creature from the Black Lagoon fan just because, one, that's a cool movie. And I always liked that creature as the monster because he was sort of like the underdog of monsters. Like no one really like, ooh, Wolfman and Frankenstein. These guys are big time. It's like, creature. He was sort of like the outcast monster of himself, but he's kind of like my favorite because he's so original and he's came with this fish guy that, he's not really a monster. It's like people are swimming in his pool. Like, get out, man. You're not supposed to be there. And he just wanted to hang out with the good-looking lady. So, how was he wrong? And, of course, he kind of wraps her up and dunks her in and kind of kidnaps her. But, that's not cool. But I always liked Creature from Black Lagoon. So it was kind of cool to – and I had exposure on, this is a long time ago. And all you guys are fairly young. So I grew up, with no cable television, obviously no internet. And, so you get to see reruns on Saturday mornings or, Saturday afternoons, late night on Thursday, midnight theater, see old, classic studio movies. And so you get exposed to those and you get to be kind of cool. You're like, yeah, those are old movies, but they're kind of cool. Let's go see the cool new stuff. And I wasn't even really a huge fan of like the new horror stuff. You went to see all the Jason movies and like Freddy, I think was the most terrifying villain / monster of the 80s because he wasn't real. I mean, he was in your mind. So that was a whole other level of terror. You're like, wait, now I can't even go to sleep. That's my favorite thing to do. And, but it's, monsters are always a reflection of a kind of culture or society's fears of their time. Right. And that's what the classics were coming out of the Depression and the war years, things like that. And we had our current ones. They were cool. I just kind of like all different types of film. Anyway, I didn't grow up like a horror nut. I was a sci-fi kid more, I think. I think I really gravitated towards that more, but the horror stuff was fun and it was cool and it was scary. There was movies that were scary. I mean, the most terrifying movie I've ever seen in my life, the scariest horror movie I've ever seen is The Wizard of Oz, and that comes on every year. So you have to watch that every year. And yes, Wizard of Oz is a horror movie.
Yeah,
and
those flying monkeys.
Yeah, stop. Yes. I just want to make sure they're not behind me because I don't like those guys.
Yeah.
But, growing up seeing cool stuff in the 70s, I remember being terrified and fascinated at The Exorcist. When I was a young kid, I was like, why did I see this as a young kid? Like, who was showing me this? And, but being on TV and in the movies too, it takes a little of the teeth out of it because you know how kind of the sausage is made, but it doesn't matter. A good story can be scary as shit.
Sure.
Kind of bouncing off that, in the documentary, you kind of talk about how the 80s was this watershed moment for featuring kids in film and kind of children's and family entertainment. And kind of what we talk about on the show is kind of the evolution of children's movies and kids movies and the evolution of the aesthetic and the thematics and how they all connect. So I'm wondering, as a kid growing up in the 80s, because we all kind of came of age in the 90s, were you kind of cognizant of that switch to more children's-based entertainment, or was it something in hindsight that you kind of noticed?
I think you understand it more in hindsight, but you're certainly aware of it, not only as just a viewer of that era, but also someone who was, quote unquote, inside, because you're actually aware of these projects. You're auditioning for most of them, because there's a lot of kids in the business at any one time. Even back then, there's a smaller group that are fortunate enough to do a majority of the roles. But, leading up to about the mid 80s and late 80s, there wasn't a lot of stuff that was geared directly at kids or a kid or a group of kids. We had some, but it was just starting to change, right? Like they were the focus, they were the lead, they were the groups that, we were going to relate to and connect to and watch these stories. And I think as a kid in that time, you definitely saw, kind of a changing, it started to evolve a little bit. And then cable came out and 90s came out. There's a ton of kids programming, even in movies and kids, and you have Nickelodeon and ABC Family, Disney Channel and all this stuff that really launched. And Nickelodeon was really kind of one of those, originators in the early 90s. But then that even, led to even larger mainstream movies where the kids were kind of the focus. So I think that was kind of a great transition period because, one, it was interesting. So all of us could have something to watch and relate to instead of just watching adults and then hoping they had kids in the story.
Yeah.
And like, oh, look, Offspring, could be us. And it really kind of led to, I think the studios and they also saw it's like, well, wait a minute, we're taking out a lot of audience. Like kids go to movies. Let's make movies with kids, for kids, and about kids. We'll sell more tickets, except for Monster Squad. But so I do remember a lot of my favorite movies in the 80s are really the stories. The main vehicles are the kids, and of course, your big time ones like E.T. and things like Goonies and Monster Squad. My two favorite, there's a lot of kids adventure movies in the 80s. There's some great ones like the originals, and a lot of people's favorite kids adventure movie is Monster Squad. A lot of favorite kids adventure movie of the era is the Goonies. My two favorite kids adventure movies of the time are Red Dawn and Stand By Me.
Mm-hmm.
Choices.
Two very different kids adventure movies.
Yeah.
And a lot of people argue with me that Red Dawn is not a kids adventure movie, and I actually say it is the ultimate kids adventure.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, definitely.
I want to jump forward in time to the kind of closer to where we are now. And at some point you had to have said, there's got to be a Monster Squad documentary. And at some point you became the director of it, which is unusual to have the star of the movie sort of shepherd this historical documentary. So I want to ask, how did that come to be? And then with that, how hard was it sort of regathering the squad? Because you have so many important voices in the movie. And tell me about both how you started and then how you got all these great people to participate.
Yeah, really kind of the catalyst to even thinking about a story about a documentary about the Monster Squad. And Wolfman's Got Nards isn't actually really a story about the Monster Squad. It's about the relationship that the fans have with film, and told through the lens of Monster Squad fans. And then we deep dive into this interesting dynamic because ever since that original cast reunion screening in 2006 at the Alamo Drafthouse, where everything just kind of blew up. And then that was the watershed, seminal, dynamite exploding event that launched the last 13 years of what's been going on. And, a year later, Lionsgate's putting out a double disc 20th anniversary DVD that sells like gangbusters. We're on the road constantly doing conventions and appearances and festivals. And, for the first year or two, you're like, oh, this is interesting. What a neat little thing. This is going to die out in about 6 or 8 months. Maybe we get a year out of this. And we couldn't have been more wrong. We, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and stronger and going on this upward trajectory. And because of that, you're constantly engaging with this fan base, either online or face-to-face at conventions and screenings and meeting these people. And I kept hearing these amazing stories of why this movie was their favorite movie. And that's what you all thought it was. It was like, it's just our favorite movie. Woohoo, this is cool. But that it was more than that. And after a while, a number of years, you start to realize that there's something unique about what this movie did to the kids that saw it. Whenever they saw it for the first time, whether it was in the theater, whether it was on HBO, where they recorded on a blank VHS on HBO and passed around the neighborhood, and their friend showed it to them, or they rented it every Saturday from the local video store. I say those because that's the stories I constantly got over years. But then I realized that these stories were all the same, yet they were all very individual and very personal. And then they started getting deeper and more personal and more emotional. And I realized that people just didn't like this movie. This movie connected with them and impacted their lives in some way. And some people had actually changed their lives and shaped who they are or how they do things, what they wanted to do as an adult. And now they've shown it to their kids as a second generation. And I was like, wait a minute, this is really something I think it's extremely unique, the dynamic and that this fan base phenomena has with the connection to this individual film. So I thought that was something neat to look at, but it was also very important that you mentioned, yes, I'm the lead of the source material movie of the inspiration of these great stories and these fans. But I'm now also, I mean, I developed the doc, I created the production, and like I actually directed the film with my awesome production team from Pilgrim Media Group, headed up by my man Henry McComas. So you had to be very aware that you weren't making, from day one, it was like, this is not about myself. This is not about even us as a cast. I wanted to turn the lens around and focus on the individuals and the groups of people that are the only reason we're talking about this movie that died 25, 30 years ago. And why are we still talking about it? And why do they care about it so much? And how did it shape and change their lives? And I wanted the focus to be on them and those stories, because I realized over years, hearing those stories, that those stories were a story. And that's what we wanted to really kind of try to figure out a way to show and tell. But you know, we were very, very aware of, one, this is not a making of doc. This is not a where are they now doc. And it's certainly not a here's that, you know, big shovel full of nostalgia coming right at you, open up wide, here it is, gulp, and then you know, like, thanks everybody, bye. We touch on all of that a little bit, but that's not the main point of the focus of Wolfman's Got Nards. It really is about the fans, how this movie impacted them, why, and why are they still connected and impacted by it 30 years later.
Yeah, in the documentary, you see a lot of really interesting stories about fans and the impact the movie had on them. The one I'm mainly thinking of is the man who's in the hospital that you all go to visit. I thought that was really neat. Were there any particularly interesting stories with some encounters you had with fans that didn't make it into the movie?
Oh man, I mean, I think the ones that really, you know, that are holy cow and amazing, they're in the film, because those just, you know, can't be beat. And Douglas is the guy you're referring to.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great story, because we got very lucky, because I put the deal together to do the doc with the studio partner, and had my production team that, you know, I didn't know, but now we're very closely working with each other.
Yeah.
and we're on the road. But then we put together this Alamo Drafthouse 30th anniversary tour, which we were in 17 cities in like 17 days. And it was me and Ryan Lambert and Ashley Bank and Ashley's baby that had to come with us the whole time. And that ended up being such a great part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was exhausting. And we were in, it was Corpus Christi. And what's ironic is we were in Houston the night before, drive down to Corpus Christi, and Hurricane Harvey is about a half a day away. And, you know, that smoked Houston for like 3 days. And it just chased us around Texas and got us on like the fourth day when we circled back into Austin. But during this tour, you know, some of it you see it in kind of like this sped up kind of version, but everybody that went to the Alamos to see this kind of 30th anniversary showing of the Monster Squad, everybody that bought a ticket got a signed mini poster. So Ryan and Ashley and I would have to show up an hour or two early, depending on how many tickets or how many shows that night. Because yes, we did 17 Alamos, but more than half of those had double screenings. So they had, were going on simultaneously or one after the other. So we had about 25, 26, 27 shows, and, intros and Q&As, and we had to sign anywhere from 100 to 300 posters before every night. So we had to get there, and one of the managers came up to the room where we were and said, "Hey, do you mind? There's someone's mom that's downstairs that was just wondering if her son could get his poster because he can't come to the screening." And we were like, "Yeah." And we could have very easily said, "Yeah, just take this one." And we kind of looked at each other, and I looked around. I said, "You know what? I'll walk this down to her and just say hi and see what the issue is." And I went down there. There was this mom. I don't remember Douglas's mom name. Super sweet, and she was all upset. And she was like, "I just didn't know if I could get his poster because he had bought his ticket months ago, and he's in the hospital, and they won't let him out to come, and he's missing the event that he's been looking forward to." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's awful. What's his name?" So I'm going to personalize it and say, "Get well soon," or something like that. and I asked, she started telling me a little about it and gave her a hug and gave her the poster and walked away. And I said, "What hospital is he at?" And she told me, and I was like, "Okay, well, tell him we love him. Tell him we said hi. Next time, maybe we can do something special for him if we had known ahead of time." And so we do the screening, and the next morning I was like, I put on my documentary producer hat and said, "Where's this hospital? Do you guys mind if we leave a little bit early? Let's go over and see if for some reason we can go and talk to him. And maybe the hospital let, a crew come in." I was like, this is never going to happen. And I went in there and I just went into the administrator's office, asked if we could go. And he was actually in a wing that you're not supposed to have any visitors. And we worked it all out. And like 3 hours later, like the board had to get involved and the lawyers had to sign off, like on, bringing a crew up there. The family had to sign off as a thing. It was supposed to be a surprise. And we walked in and surprised this kid in his hospital room. And he didn't get to see the 30th anniversary screening of Monster Squad, but I hope that, made his weekend anyway, because it sucked for him because he was stuck in a hospital.
It's almost better than a 30th anniversary screening.
It might. He can watch the movie anytime. We got to go in and hang out with him, and luckily they signed off and allowed us to use it in the movie, because I was seeing that as this is what it's all about. A little bit selfish and proved like this is documentary gold. We got to get this. But then also as, playing the guy, I was like, let's just go make this kid's day no matter what happens. And, hopefully we did. I think, he hit us up, a year or two later and was like, "I'm doing good. I still remember it." And,
great.
Luckily we get to, use it in the documentary because I like that bit. I like that bit.
I discovered this movie and watched it on when it was available for streaming on Amazon Prime or Prime Video.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about when this movie, the year after Alamo popularized in 2006, is when you guys got a DVD release. So when did the movie start becoming available, like digitally? First thing, and like when that happened, did you get I feel like that was like the next step in this movie's legacy that's like preserved digitally online for? Definitely?
You would think so, because there's a number of films, but to be associated with one that has literally been now on every single piece of media that you can make movies on, 35 on cable, on VHS and beta, on Laserdisc, and then dead for a number of years, and then DVD, and then 2 Blu-ray runs, and then it goes on Hulu, and then it has a Netflix run, and then it goes back on Hulu during Halloween every year, and then Amazon had it for like 6 or 8 months, and it just kept. You're like, what is? That's kind of it. Like, what's the next? Like, just the brain implant? I was like, what's the next? Kind of way. Like, I just watched, like Matrix style. Like, I just watched Monster Squad. That's how we consume movies in 20 years. But I think that's fascinating. It's a great question because we've actually talked about that very thing, right? And it's kind of cool. The only reason that's happening is because the fans won't let this movie go. They won't let it die. And like, you saw it just recently for the first time, but these are the people that will not let their favorite thing fade away. They will hold on to it. They will support it. They will pump air back into it if it needs it. They will give it, CPR, and they did, in 06 and 07 and sprang back to life. And it's just been crazy. It's been a very interesting ride.
Talking a little bit about your experience with the Monster Squad, how has kind of your relationship, obviously you've made this documentary over 8 years, but in that interim between starring in it and then kind of this revival, what was your relationship with the movie like? How did it evolve over time?
I thoroughly enjoyed making it. I thought it was unbelievable experience. I thought the movie was fun and good. I always lamented in the final cut that there were some things that I thought was cool in the script that we didn't get to shoot, or scenes we did shoot that got cut out. And you always do that as someone in a show. But then for it to not perform well for no fault of your own, despite what some reviewers say. We had some reviewers say like, and the kids are terrible. And you're like,
Aww.
Thanks, Des Moines Register guy. And I don't know if that was the Des Moines Register. I just picked it up. Sorry, Des Moines. Love Iowa. But, and then you move on and you have to accept it. And it could have been much different if it was a hit and it was, a Saturday morning cartoon and a sequel and action figures and stuff like that. But it wasn't. And so you just move on. And then it kind of goes, luckily Ryan and I and we went right into other shows and other work. And then, I ended up going to high school and still working, and then went to college. And, it was just this great experience that just didn't make a big hit, but then people still kind of remembered it and knew it. But to have the resurgence happen, it was fascinating. Like I said, we thought it was going to kind of wane and die out after a year or two. And it not only didn't wane, it didn't even level out. It just kept going up and up. That was fascinating. The relationship with the movie starts to change a little bit because now it's impacting your life a little bit different, because now you're busy with a constant travel schedule talking about a movie you did 20, 25, 30 years ago. And you keep up sort of this cycle and this rotation and meeting these awesome people. And you realize that this is kind of unique and special, and you start to appreciate it, in a different way. And then when you start seeing it, you're on tour with it, or you're at a screening and you keep going to appear for it, you either watch the movie or you wait out in the lobby. You can only watch a movie so many times, but I like watching bits and pieces of it. I started focusing on other parts of the movie. Usually when you're going to watch yourself, right? I mean, everybody's going to do that. If you're in a movie, you're like, hey, there I am. I've seen myself a bazillion times. I was there. I know what my, horrible inflections and voice cracks are going to sound like, but I started focusing on other actors and my other castmates and some of the effects and the background stuff. And I just started to really appreciate that this movie was really good. This movie was actually really good, and the creature effects and the writing and all the acting, from top to bottom is phenomenal. And then you realize, you're like, wait a minute, our movie's way ahead of its time. Our hero is the 5-year-old girl. This isn't a boy's adventure movie. Our hero's the little girl. This is amazing. And, and then you realize all of these tie-ins with other Shane Black stuff and, other Fred Decker things. And, it's, you start to wonder about some cool things a little bit wider, but I really started to have a little bit more appreciation for why in understanding why the fans really connected with it, because sometimes it's the characters, sometimes it's the story. You realize, you're like, hey, wait a minute. This wasn't just some fun movie that you stood in front of a cam and hollered out lines with. This is a story about kids that arguably are misfits. That's why they're friends. That's why they, kind of gravitated towards each other. They like all this weird dorky stuff that no one else either wants to know or understands or cares about. That's why they're kind of like a club. And, why is this older kid coming in, and why is the young kid there? Like, what's everybody doing? And you start really analyzing a little bit, and you're like, this is very interesting. And Monster Squad's got a lot of packed in there. It's not just the kids that are fun and adventurous, and then there's these monsters and they got to fight them. It's like there's a family breaking up. There's like, family dynamics going on. There's like job, stress going on, and, some random weird monster shit going on in the neighborhood. And you're like, wait, this is a lot. There's a Holocaust survivor, and, that's the weird guy. That's really the message of the movie. It's like, maybe that old guy at the end of the block isn't the guy you should be afraid of. Maybe you should ask if you can rake his leaves and get to know him, because he may have some really cool stories to tell you, and you can learn some stuff. And luckily, if you were a kid and you did that, or you knew that people, knew those people in the neighborhood, that's pretty cool. And don't discount your 5-year-old sister, because she can end up saving the world. And I think that's sort of, kind of prescient, and, we should look at stuff like that a little bit more. So you really started appreciating the movie. But then it was really just this impact with these fans, and I couldn't not do something about it. And I wanted to try to tell that story. And everybody always asks, and I think you alluded to a little bit, and I probably dropped the ball on answering it, but what was my impact, or my story about the doc? And like I was very cognizant not to make this movie about myself or us as the cast. But I got asked that question, like when we just started, like it was our second film festival. And Phil Noble from Fangoria was hosting the screening and was like, Andre, I've seen this movie. I dig it. It's fantastic. But we see everybody on camera, and you're there, and we get everybody's personal story of what this movie meant to them and how it changed them. But we never get yours. What's up with that? And I was like, oh, damn it. I was like, that's a really good question. Thanks, like total actual journalist, writer guy, Phil, putting me on the spot in front of theater for little people. And then I realized my answer was, Phil, I don't really have an answer. I didn't want it to, the documentary is my answer to that question. And I was lucky enough to get a bunch of awesome people, a very small handful, but a bunch of awesome people to come and work on this film with me that felt just as strongly about telling their story through their work. And I think it shows.
I really like that, because I was thinking the same thing, and that's sort of why I asked, because I was, yeah, it's not a it's not a memoir by any means. It's something you're pointing the camera the other way.
Yeah.
And I want to ask, broadly speaking, because we're people who love movies, but we also love sharing movies, and we love sort of getting people to see great stuff that they may have missed from 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. And one of my favorite parts is that whole kind of thread of one guy at Alamo Drafthouse saying, we've got this movie, maybe we could do a screening of it, and that sort of snowballing into where we are right now. And so from a film curator or film lover's perspective, how do you see optimal ways to sort of build that energy and sort of bring the masses out to a classic movie that maybe didn't get its due in 1987?
Well, honestly, I think the foundation of how that works has always been the same. It's word of mouth, and it's a friend telling a friend in the neighborhood, or inviting or having a get together. But now it's easier and broader because we have technology, and we can communicate with so many more people. And I think that's making an impact. But what's awesome about that is we don't always have to be separated with it now, because you can talk to someone in Florida if you're in Washington and say, hey, you should check out this movie. You still can. And the attention can go on whatever this film is or piece of work that you're referencing. But you can also still get together. And I think what's interesting now is, even in a time where we all can't hang out, like we want to, things like the drive-in are coming back. And that's one of my favorite experiences. That's one of my favorite things of all time ever in this world, is the drive-in movie theater. I just thought it was fascinating. I thought it was something so Americana, when you're growing up in the 70s and 80s, to go to the drive-in. Like, you get to take your car and you park it and you watch a movie. And it was a thoroughly different experience. But now that's coming back because it has to, because people want to go and have a shared experience and watch something as a group. And that's why ideas like Quibi die. Like, oh, you can only watch it on your commute on your phone for 7 minutes. But I can't really, I can't enjoy it. I can't share it. It's about that sharing. And you're not going to watch that 7 minutes again with your friend. But you see a cool movie, you'll watch that movie again with your friend. You'll sit for 90 minutes or 2 hours as it impacts you. But it's different. That's what's impact. That's the power and the impact of film has. And we learned that 70 years ago. And we've been shaped by it in storytelling and how the theaters were, the theaters have been an outlet for very many things, strife, fear, economic depression, cultural, distress. Originally, the movie theaters got popular. No one went to the movie theaters because it wasn't a thing in the 1920s when they first started opening, but it was the only buildings in your city that had air conditioning. So that's where everybody went when it was blazing hot in New York City or Philadelphia or Chicago. And so they started like, oh, this is our gathering place. This is our, really what it is, and then generations prior to that, you either listen to the radio, but you're around your fireplace, or it's just movie theaters and getting together to watch movies with a group is just sitting around the campfire listening to stories from your tribe. And if you think about it, you would sit around a campfire and watch this flickering light. And that's what movies are. You sit around in a group and you watch a flickering light and you tell stories. And I think that's very, very fundamental in our DNA as humans. Especially when we became social beings and lived in groups. And I think it's a very neat connection there that I like to visualize that. And it's just the new campfire. And right now we're all going crazy because we can't go do that. But then you're like, hey, we can drive in our cars let's do that. Or we can do a virtual screening like on Cena or something else like that. And, we can all get together and we can talk about it. Or we can all get on Zoom. Like, I'd rather be hanging out with all of you in one of y'all's backyards talking about stuff and just running a camera or a microphone, right? Because that's fun. And whether there's iced tea or beer or both or whatever, and just, hanging out and talking. But this will have to suffice for now.
Yeah.
Yeah. The drive-in closest to my town, actually just a few weekends ago showed Monster Squad. So, and that was a really cool
which drive-in?
It's in Paris, Kentucky, so it's far away.
I know where. Yeah, I know it.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So
They showed Monster Squad, and they actually said like this is one that a lot of the kids have been requesting. So that's just really cool to me to think that kids are still asking to see a movie.
They are. It's insane because on top of that dynamic of the original fans, there's a whole other second generation of Monster Squad fans, and not that are just kids of the originals. It's like, I just saw this movie. I don't know if you're a fan of Monster Squad. You don't have to be. It's not an
I like it a lot,
or a recurrent, but if you've just seen it recently,
we all like it a lot.
Well, thanks. And, that's new too. So that means it's the newer generation. You don't have to just be the kids of the original fans. And something there is I don't know if it's the archetypes, if it's the stories, it's the characters, it's the situations, it's the adventure. I think it comes down to the heart and authenticity of the story and the characters and what we see of why kids relate to it, or whenever you see it, you're going to relate to something. And, Shane even talked to me. He's like, I don't think you plan for that to happen when you write a story or a script, but to see it happen decades later, that's pretty fascinating, that something you did connected on some level. And, he got it. And I'd been seeing it, and that's what I wanted to try to look at, analyze, and kind of tell, the examination of that story a little bit.
Going back to the drive-in in your film, it's playing a movie called Groundhog Day Part 12, and that was one of the funniest parts of the movie to me when I recently discovered it. So I was curious how that title came up with and who came up with it.
I'm sure that's it's either a Fred or Shane thing. It's probably a Fred thing. To have I can't go see the movie, so I'll sit on my roof because there's a giant drive-in, a mile away, and everybody's dream, right? You just get, it's like watching, a Cubs game from across the street on the roof of your apartment building, right. And that was just kind of fascinating, and I didn't know how that was going to look until we see the movie, and because obviously I wasn't on a real roof looking at a real, drive-in movie theater. That was actually on a stage, and we're just faking it. And that's a big matte painting. The old technology before green screen, there was actually giant matte paintings of this drive-in, and then visual effects kind of plop in the movie in that square. It's fantastic. We were right in the middle of transitioning of technology for effects, right? Going from practical into digital visual effects. We're, kind of the spaceships on strings, but they were flying. You could remove those strings and you could create awesome graphics. But to blend right then, I think we had one of the last movies that blended in a matte painting that actually superimposed some VFX on top of a matte painting. Sure. I mean, that is classic Hollywood meeting new Hollywood. Yeah. And I think it's really cool that we have that bit. But yeah, the drive-in in the Monster Squad, what a great concept. But Groundhog Day Part 12, I think really what it is just it's sort of a little tongue-in-cheek joke at all the current horror movies that were going on, because we had 5 Freddys up until then, or maybe more, and a couple summer camp everything's a summer camp slasher movie. Someone's dying, we all learn what not to do in the woods, and or they're gonna die. And it's just sort of like a tongue-in-cheek kind of, all these sequels. We're going to make fun of that because we're making a new movie that's in horror genre because it's a monster movie. But it's a throwback to all the classic movies, and even with the kids. And if we had ever, made subsequent monster movies, I think it would be, they'd honor all the old school 40s and 50s, sequel styles, or the Abbott and Costello kind of, serials. And I think that was neat. I think it was just sort of I don't think it was thumbing the nose at the new movies. I think it was honoring them because we are fans in the movie and we want to see the new the 12th installment of Groundhog Day. But what's interesting about Groundhog Day is like one of my favorite things. Like, look, there's Monster Squad T-shirts. There's obviously the Stephen King Rules T-shirt, where there's a whole other thing of iconography that just took off a life of its own. My favorite thing I've ever seen is they make a Groundhog Day Part 12 T-shirt.
Wow.
And I'm like,
That's
where?
amazing.
I saw a guy at Fantastic Fest like 5 years. I was like, where did you get that? And he was like, holy shit. It's like, and I was like, can I get a picture with you in that shirt? He's like, that is rad. And then, of course, I've always actually wanted to, I think it would be so meta and great to sit down, bang out a script, and actually make Groundhog Day Part 13. And just release the movie as like the 13th installment. I guarantee you every Monster Squad fan would go see it.
Yeah.
They absolutely would go see it. And, you tie some stuff in, it should be great.
I'm sure you could do one of those like fake trailers that people make a lot now, as if it's like actually going to come out. And I'm sure that would get the fans.
I could use that as the fundraiser. I think everybody gotta make, I don't know. That might be I have to check into that because I've always joked about it, but that might be some free IP. That might not be like a real IP that someone owns. It might be totally open to do. I just think it's a neat idea, and I think genre fans would love something like that.
For sure.
Yes, sort of moving on to something else in the movie that's really taken on a life of its own. Another joke is the quote that ended up as the title of your documentary, Wolfman's got Nards. I was just kind of wondering, do you remember like reading that in the script or being or filming the scene with Brent Chalem where he delivered the line? Could you have ever thought that line would be as iconic as it is? Did you think it was a super funny joke when you?
No, I thought it was actually I initially thought, because I say kick him in the Nards first. So I'm the first person in the movie that says Nards, and then Brent, I guess, is the only other one. Oh no, he says it twice. Yeah. But then he says Wolfman's got Nards, and I say kick him in the Nards. And I remember reading the script, and I honestly asked him, I was like, I don't know what this word is. Are you talking about his nuts? Like we're talking about balls? Like this is what's Nards? Like this sounds really corny. And can I change it? Can I just say nuts? And I remember very vividly that Fred was like, no, let's keep the line as it is on the page. It's a thing. I was like, no, it's not, dude. No one's ever said this, ever. And I was like, I know more than you do. I'm 13. And, luckily we didn't. It was a bad idea, to even think. I was just uncomfortable. I thought it was going to be lame and corny. As a kid, I was like, I don't know what this word is. Like, no, I've never heard this. And lo and behold, it becomes arguably Wolfman's got Nards becomes no doubt the most recognizable, iconic, T-shirt driving, hat stitching, line from the movie. And that's why it's the only name for a documentary if you're going to talk about the impact of, film on fans and this film on their fans. It's got to be Wolfman's got Nards.
Yeah.
On the note of the music, we noted as we were watching this together when we talked about it on our show, we noted the music is pretty cool. Because when we were talking about Michael Cimbello, who's actually like does a ton of like great music that we admire. So have you had a relationship with Michael Cimbello, the guy who wrote the Monster Squad song, at all?
Never. And who wouldn't? Like, it was a little kind of like we said, I never heard any of that stuff until we saw like the premiere of the movie, totally finished.
Yeah.
And, we hear Rock Until You Drop, and it's it's kind of a cool, campy, not very hardcore, rock star, getting together, the team thing. You're like, wait, what? And then at the end, he's rapping.
Yeah.
Like, wait, wait, Michael Cimbello from all the other movie soundtracks and like my top 40 station in my mom's car is rapping at the end of my movie. Like, what is happening here? And then like, couldn't they have gotten somebody else to rap? Like, was Chuck D not available? That would have been pretty rad, right? I would have taken Flava Flav, it's fine. I also think the Beasties would have done a great Monster Squad rap.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Great, yeah.
But I would have settled for Run DMC.
Mhm.
But I'm just glad they didn't get Hammer, because that would have been terrible. Like MC Hammer would be like,
Oh yeah.
But it's kind of neat because they always at the time, like studio style is a good. It's like, hey, all the kids like this rap. Like we got to have a rap. And so we're getting this big, guy. We got a studio contract with Sambello. Let's bring him in here. He's got this song. It's a campy little, jukebox tune. And then he's going to do this rap thing. It's great. The kids love rap. And exactly that's what it sounds like in that room, because they're all complete moronic dudes. They don't know what they're talking about. And then apparently they all go run for office and are politicians. But anyway, that's a different thing. It's like all the kids like the rap.
I like that the movie puts all this effort not to specifically say the IP because of legal jargon or whatever, and then the song just says all the names of every character.
Yeah, it says because the creature from he's Gilman in the movie, but the song says creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yes, so I think in music is different. You can get away with it if you pay for. I think they probably paid the licensing fee to say. I think it's different. Sure. Visual representation is different than spoken word, I guess, or recorded voice. But yeah, the IP with Universal is interesting because Universal passed on they pitched it to Universal and they passed on it. They're like, why would we make a movie with all of these monsters together? We would never do that. And then a couple years later they made Van Helsing, which was all the monsters together and terrible. But Hugh Jackman was good at it. But the reason they had to change the visual representation of the monsters, like all the literature stuff was public domain because it was so old. Creature from the Black Lagoon was obviously an original Universal kind of IP, but the classic it was Jack Pierce kind of makeup builds for Frankenstein and Creature from the Black Lagoon were still being used. We referenced it in the doc, I think, still being used at the theme parks. So there was still like an active kind of visual copyright. And I almost think that that's better that happened, because all the Stan Winston guys had to come up with they were just going to copy their favorite movies as kids. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I get to do Frankenstein. Yeah, let's do, this. And when they said, hey, you can't do it exactly like, you can't just mimic it. Now you have to come up with a different design and a different look. I think that's what changed the game. I think that's what made it even better, because they're still the same monsters. It's just a different representation and a different kind of, physical build of them, or, a visual build of them. And that ingenuity and creativity of them having to change before they started shooting, I think is what changed the game in creature effects in the industry as a whole. Because these guys were the guys that were making the movies. Look, 85, 86, 87 was big for creature effects. Mm-hmm. And these are the teams of guys that were just 20 years old at the time and figuring out what's the next evolution in making creatures and how do we do it. And that's what we wanted to touch on, that because this movie impacted those guys, because they are all now the icons of the industry. Yeah. 30 years later, and they're everybody's master. And, people hire them. They're all super successful, and they were just apprentice artists. It's, Stan Winston hired them on and put them on teams and said, go make this. And boy, did they. And changed the industry, honestly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the creature design is really a standout in this movie. I feel like maybe it's just based on when I saw it, but like when I think of Creature from the Black Lagoon or Gilman, it's usually the Monster Squad Gilman that comes to mind first.
Well, I mean, the original Creature was so interesting and innovative, but it's old, so you kind of get like, oh, there's a guy in there. I get it. It's a little clunky, but it was fascinating that Rico Browning swam around in that suit with a scuba tank and some awesome underwater, cinematography, which is crazy.
Yeah,
I got to meet him. I got to meet him years ago. We used to sign at conventions. It was like, Mr. Browning, we've been to a couple. I just wanted to meet you and say this is really awesome to meet you. Yeah. And he was like 85 at the time or something, and just an awesome dude. But yeah, Gilman, that's a little bit different. Like we cover kind of the stories of the guys we talked to in the documentary. to explain their kind of process and impact.
Yeah.
But Gilman was very special. It changed the game, and Steve Wang and Matt Rose got assigned to build that, and they figured it out. And Tom Woodruff actually got to be in the suit, which changed his life because that was the first time he was a creature performer. And then he built a career off that, and then also built a giant creature studio with Alec Guinness called Amalgamated Dynamics, Studio ADI. And Steve Wang and Matt Rose, they had their own shop, and John Rosengrant and Shane Mahan went and made Legacy Effects, which is arguably along with ADI, like the biggest out. I mean, it's insane. You walk into these, we shot John and Shane's interview at Legacy, but we weren't allowed to roll cameras on their shop floor because they were working on giant movies at the time. So you can't show any of the cool shit. And same thing at Tom Woodruff's, like in his lobby, you got some stuff that's cleared, but it's not from anything. Because when we kind of do that shop walkthrough with me and Tom, if we had turned the camera to the right, you would have seen a whole rack of all the new Predator suits.
Oh, wow.
Because they did the new Predator with Shane and Fred. And, then you realize you're like, wait a minute, there's a big Predator and a little
spoiler.
And he's like, yeah, can't tell. I'm like, ah. And I knew a little of that story going in, but I didn't know about Super Predator until just before the movie came out. And, you can't show all this amazing stuff that's on their floor, but you get the tour and you can go hang out and have lunch with these guys. And that's pretty bitchin'.
That's super cool. Yeah.
I did love that you were able to bring it to Shape of Water, though. That was such a cool kind of bookend of that kind of.
Yeah, there's more than one tie-in there, right? And I love the story of Mike Hill because I met Mike at, I think, Monster Palooza. He's just this gifted kind of creature effects artist who's rather famous and, has made big movies, including Shape of Water, which is just another Creature from Black Lagoon movie, just done with Del Toro. But the reason Mike Hill got into practical creature effects is because when he was a kid, he got asked by his local cinema outside of London to dress up like characters for movies that were coming out. And so he would work on the costumes and get his buddies. And the first movie they ever did same year was Dream Warriors. Nightmare 3, Dream Warriors. And then the next month, Monster Squad was coming out, and the theater manager said, hey, will you guys come? We got this new movie coming in. And he's like, oh man, I've been wanting to see this movie. And they dressed up like the monsters from the Monster Squad. They looked terrible, but they were teenagers. But that led him into getting hired as a teenager to do makeup effects in London for television shows and things like that. And then fast forward 25, 30 years later, he's making an Oscar-winning suit for the next Creature from Black Lagoon movie made by Del Toro, which is a beautiful movie. I mean, absolutely beautiful movie. And that's why I make the joke when we go in there. He's like, oh, I made these for Shape of Water. I'm like, oh, I've heard of it. That's a fantastic creature effect suit that is inspired of how they now make creature applications and monsters and suits that people can wear. And Doug Jones was in that one. I mean, he's been in every monster suit in the last 20 years, right? But and it's fascinating because of the innovations that guys like Steve and Matt and all those guys made 30 years ago for Monster Squad. When you get in detail with the stories behind how they conceptual, even the paint scheme for Gilman that Steve wanted to do, if you look at it, like it's Predator. Because if you know the whole story behind the original Predator, it was originally like this red rubber chicken suit that Jean-Claude Van Damme was running around in, right? And then they stopped production and fired all that team, and then Schwarzenegger was like, hey, these guys are pretty good, it's Determinator with Stan Winston's group, why don't we have them take a crack at making this alien? And all these guys working on it, Steve Wayne working, it's like, we want to make an alien look. What would an alien look like from another planet? It's not going to be colorful and have whiz bangs and feathers and all that. It's going to be very biological. And they worked on that, and the paint scheme, for Gilman. And Steve wanted to make Gilman not corny and look biological and kind of something that would live in the water. And he couldn't convince Stan of how he wanted to paint the Gilman. And so this is, months and months before. And so Steve had to enter an effects contest that Tom Savini and and Stan was a judge. It was like these three big wigs of creature effects at the time were the judges of this contest. And Steve made like this little like ocean beetle or something, but he did it in the paint scheme and he won the contest.
Wow.
And Stan was like, so this is what you're talking, like you've been bugging me about, he's like, yes. They're like, okay, that looks pretty cool. We'll paint Gilman like that. And so I saw these amazing stories, and that's one latex suit, not just the paint scheme, but the build, and they build it by hand. And, Tom Woodruff gets in there and he's glued in there. It's one piece, the bodysuit, and then the head goes on and you're glued in and he can't get out. It's insane.
Yeah, that's crazy. Sort of more on the monsters, but more on some of the performing aspects, not the makeup. Something they mentioned I found really interesting in the documentary is how they didn't really prep some of the kid actors for what the monsters were going to do in their scenes to kind of get more genuine reactions. As one of the lead child stars in the movie, do you have any interesting stories about kind of acting under those conditions? Whether are there any scenes where your fear is genuine? Or
well, it starts off with Tom Noonan, who plays Frankenstein's monster, and Duncan Regehr, who plays a fantastic Dracula.
Yeah, really good Dracula.
Probably one of the best, at least top 5 of all time, some people's top 3. Mm-hmm. And they are very serious, very skilled, very trained method actors. And it wasn't decided for this, but they decided that they did not want to be around us or see us or us see them, one, out of costume and makeup or out of character. So we never saw them as regular humans because they wanted to keep that kind of authenticity. And Duncan, when he was done with the scene, he would just leave and then come back and do more. He wouldn't hang out. You wouldn't go get some, Gatorade with him or anything like that. He would just come back and be a pissed off Dracula and then leave and then come back and be a more pissed off Dracula. Tom, would sit there in, the story with Ryan. It's like, I'm getting ready to tell 2 other people's stories, but, we kind of tell them in the doc. And Ashley, I'll get to Ashley's, kind of fake out thing in a minute. But like there's a scene where when we bring Frankenstein into the treehouse, which there's no way he could have gotten up there, but I digress. And we had to do the over the shoulder of like Tom to Ryan, and it was just Ryan and Tom on the set and the stage, and you have to change cameras and lighting, and that takes 20, 30, 40 minutes sometimes. And Ryan's just sitting in there and he's like, oh, so hey man, it's gotta be, like, how's it going? And it's been like 20 minutes and Tom Noonan goes, and Ryan's like, dude, come on. I'm the oldest one here. Like, I know you're a guy in makeup. So like, what's it good? I love all your other movies. And he's like, and so he didn't even break character, so waiting for a camera setup. And the other great story is apparently, like when the kids leave, like the adults stayed and continue to make movies all into the wee hours of the night. And that's about the Frankenstein's makeup was about 3 hours of putting it on and about an hour and a half or 2 hours of getting it off every day. And they went so late one night, apparently, I guess this is the story, that Tom was like, I'm out of here. I'm going home. And they're like, no, we got to take your, he's like, nope, I'm going home. And he went home with that shit on his face and then came back early in the morning. He's like, I'm going home. And I'm like, I would love to see that dash cam video over running a stop sign. I don't know what would have happened. But he just went home and I was like, it's crazy. But Duncan, I mean, these guys were amazing. So, the story with Ashley, we go into it in detail in the documentary, but there was a scene where Ashley was 5, when we made this movie, and the monsters, she was a professional. She knows how to make a movie, but these are scary things walking around, even if you get past the fact that we know they're fake, but, she was scared. And she did not like when Duncan had his fangs in or his red contact lenses. And so a lot of the coverage that you see them interacting at all, like he would have to have them out and then they'd shoot around it. And if Ashley was around, he wouldn't have any of that stuff in. Well, there was the one scene where I guess Fred needed a reaction and he took little Ashley Bank to the side and said, okay, here's the scene. He's going to lift you up and He's going to say a line and then you're going to scream. And she's like, okay, when? He's like, you'll know. And, it's that iconic scene where, Duncan lifts up Ashley and he's standing there and, he just crushed 6 sheriff deputies and he's got this little girl in the palm of his hand. And he delivers his line,
Yeah.
and then it changed and he opened his eyes. It was a different setup. He stayed in the line and then for the reaction shot, he turned around and he looked at Ashley and opened his eyes and had his fangs and his red contact lens. He was right in her face.
Yeah.
And hissed at her and scared the shit out of her. And so her scream is real. And I love that story. I think it's super traumatic and cruel, but she tells it all the time. So I'm just relaying her awesome story as best I can. And,
she told it really well in the documentary. Yeah. That's one of the my favorite
the fans
parts
get a kick out of it listening to her tell it because everybody loves "Give Me the Amulet, You Bitch," and which means look, I mean, Dracula has no fucks to give in this movie. He is done. He is tired. He is mad. He's been walking around for 100 years waiting for this night, and we get in his way. So he's just not happy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of something that makes this movie still connect and find new audiences of kids is there's kind of a legitimate sense of danger. It's actually pretty scary for a children's adventure movie. And I think that the monster performers are a major part of that.
Absolutely. I mean, this is not just some campy kids movie. I don't want to compare it to Goonies because I think they're two totally different movies. It's a kids adventure movie. Yes. Do we have sort of the same, kind of tropey characters? Sure. But you're going to. Those are just natural things in groups of friends, right? But Goonies is a little bit more, kind of fantastical and they're looking for a pirate ship and then being chased by the bumbling pizza brothers. Nothing really. Are they ever really in danger? Were they going to get burned by some cheese or something? I don't know. Monster Squad, people are dying left and right from the beginning of the movie.
Yeah,
and it set the tone very early, and the kids are in peril from the very beginning, and it's very real, and I think that's what kids were like. Whoa. And there's not very many movies like that. Like I said, my favorite kids adventure movie of the 80s is Red Dawn for that same reason. That's about as real and dangerous as it gets.
Yeah, that brings up a question. One of my favorite things about the documentary is your discussion of the PG-13 rating and how that really kind of was a death blow to its box office in a lot of ways. And I just want to sort of hear from your perspective, with that being so important, how a rating can affect a movie and whether or not it should have been a PG movie or whether they, it was just different time to replace, all that.
Yeah, I think it was probably one of those. It was half of the reason that it bombed. Because you're cutting yourself off at the beginning. You're hamstringing yourself before the movie's even in the theaters for people to have a chance to it. So PG-13, you have to have someone older go with you and also buy a ticket or buy the ticket for you. It has to be accompanied by an adult, and it has language and circumstances and violence and, sexual, content and things like that. And so I think what's interesting with Monster Squad is I think it would have done better as a PG rating, just even with the marketing plan. But the marketing campaign for Monster Squad was atrocious, or not atrocious. It was very contradictory of itself. There was a couple different things, and they never jive together. You see the trailer, it's dark and scary, and monsters and people dying, and werewolves turning into each other, and kids running around screaming. And then you see this other one that's kind of campy and dumb. The wanted posters that were it was like a call to action back in the day where there's nowhere to go. Where do you, there's no QR code. I don't know what to scan. There's no website. I can't look at what? And then with the thing, we touch on that a little bit. So that was really campy. We saw those. Those were what is happening here? But I think with the trailer and the reviews and it was a mixed message And parents of younger kids were not going to go let them see this scary ass, dangerous, violent movie where kids are cussing and smoking and handling weapons and killing monsters. And I think it was also a little too kid oriented with some of the marketing for the older, mid-age, older teenagers that were going to go see Lost Boys, which opened up just prior to us, because they're not going to go see a kids movie, and the younger kids are not going to be allowed to go see what the parents think is a movie that's too dangerous or dark for them. And so we had this, very small window of people that were actually going to go, or either parents took them. And, it's interesting. I always joke that now it's a thing. That's a tween movie. That's a thing now. They're written that way. They're marketed. They're shot that way. They're marketed that way. They're cast that way. So I always joke, like, if we knew there was a tween movie niche and a studio had marketed it that way, this movie would have been a giant hit. And, with that certain audience, because now you can go niche-y and still capture an audience, right? But I always joke that it would have been ultra successful, and we would have just wrapped like a month ago on Monster Squad 8 Breaking Dawn or something. It's that's always, I'm just making that joke and everybody gets a kick out of it, but that's true. I mean, you never know. Like, if just a little tweak like that would have been different. Marketing makes it different when your movie comes out. They did not let this movie season well. Like, it didn't perform opening weekend, they pulled it. Some theaters gave it another weekend. They're like, it didn't happen. Let's go. Got to move, got to make room. And they're just like, it's out. But the kids that did see it went to go bring their friends the next weekend, and it was gone. It wasn't there. If they had let it kind of just get that ramp up a little bit, I think it would have been a little different. And really all it took was maybe one more week or two more weekends. But not back in the day. If you don't perform in your first 3 days, you're out. And I think it was hamstrung, and a lot of things kind of affected that. However, that leads us to the interesting situation that we're in now.
Yeah, it's true. It gave it a new identity.
Yeah. And, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe I'd rather have made Monster Squad 8 Breaking Dawn, but I know my retirement account, my SAG pension would have liked that a lot better. But, because I've been fine. I would have said, hey guys, what are you doing? Just fly in on my jet and we'll do the podcast at the villa on the coast. Let's just do that.
Yeah, sort of speaking on some of the bizarre advertising for this movie, there's a poster I really like I found online. It's an Adidas poster using the Monster Squad characters. This is the boys are back. This time they're wearing Adidas, and you're on the poster. Did they actually dress you to photograph you in that Adidas stuff, or is that just
Oh yeah, well if you notice in Monster Squad, everybody's wearing Adidas stuff, right? So because that was an obvious product placement, kind of wardrobe thing. Whether they just got the apparel or Adidas paid the production, whatever, they did that a lot back in that day, because Adidas was really trying to come back out and kind of compete with Nike as a sportswear brand. And since their athletic gear was terrible, they had to go sort of on like the fashion apparel and kind of pop culture popular clothing. So they made wild sweatshirts and big jackets. And what was awesome about Monster Squad is ever since we made it, I made it when I was 13. The movie came out when I was 14. Every couple months I would go to the Adidas Hollywood office and load up giant duffel bags and boxes of shoes and gear and just stuff. And that lasted till I was like a sophomore in college.
Oh, wow.
And, they just kept, you just kept getting Adidas stuff. And I was always an athlete. And so I played sports left and right, and I played sports, and kind of was like, all their actual athletic apparel was terrible. Their shoes were bad to actually play sports in. But it's all I had. I was like, I can't go buy Nikes. Yes, you can. But I was super thankful to still have that, kind of connection and get all these amazing, like, leather jackets and the big kind of, funky sweatshirts that a lot of them never even got produced, but, you got access to them. And I remember one time the rep in the office was awesome. And, I was just starting to play golf because I was doing a TV show. And she's like, well, I don't have any here, but let me order some because they got to come from Germany. I'm like, okay. And so I got like, a pair of like new Adidas golf shoes in like 1980 or something, or 89. And,
cool.
That was neat. And it was just a neat time. But yeah, that poster, it was sort of like a cross promotional type thing. And, wanted to, it was kind of misleading because it's like, do the monsters wear high top Adidas?
Yeah, they have Dracula and like Adidas on here.
Yeah, it's like everyone's like the Gill man's got him like thrown over his shoulder, like he just got done like playing pickup ball at the park. And you're like, wait, this isn't the movie. We're wearing the Adidas stuff. Gilman can't wear that shit. It's got big old webbed feet. And that would have been funny if they had the shoes over his shoulder and they're all blown out. That would have been fun. So they should have done that. But yeah, I remember that photo shoot. I was the only one in it, and they got the guys behind it. But because it's so complicated, in that poster, Tom Woodruff or anybody is not in the Gilman suit. It's just the empty suit, and that's why he's kind of like doing this around.
Oh yeah, you can.
So it's totally empty.
Yeah,
it's totally empty.
Stiff in the picture.
Yeah, it's totally empty.
That explains it.
And because it's very not worth the time and money to put someone in that suit for a picture. But no, I loved getting Adidas stuff for years because it had such crazy stuff.
When we've been doing movies over the past month for our podcast, they've been movies that are like, we call them pumpkin slime, movies that are kind of like aimed at this kind of demographic, this age group that have the Halloween themes and imagery. And this was the first movie we watched for that, Monster Squad. And then the last movies we watched were actually the recent Goosebumps films that have Jack Black in them. And like watching that, I definitely felt like that movie had like the DNA of Monster Squad in it. I don't know if you've seen it, but I definitely felt like you could tell it was sort of an influence point for those movies, in my opinion. Yeah. So a little while back, we were talking about like how Universal is trying to make these movies with like all the monsters now, even though, the business people at the time didn't think that was the best idea, even though it was. So as a member of the original Monster Squad, do you have any advice for the Universal dark universe they're trying to build?
Well, it kind of dovetails in with the much maligned attempt to remake Monster Squad.
Yeah.
That Rob Cohen teamed up with Michael Bay to
I didn't even know about that.
Monster Squad under the Platinum Dunes label. And Rob Cohen, obviously big studio producer, big studio director, makes huge movies. He was a young, a producer on the original Monster Squad.
Yeah.
And he saw the resurgence in 07 and 08, 09, and they just said, hey, we're going to remake this. And I'm going to team up with a giant studio. We're going to go make this. And everybody hated the idea. Not us. I mean, just like fandom was like, no, don't step on our favorite movie. And then that went sort of like into development, kind of turnaround, that's a term, turnaround hell. And they couldn't break the script. They couldn't figure out the story. They had hired a couple writing teams, I guess. I don't know. It kind of sat on the shelf. And then Universal announced the Dark Universe. And I guess Platinum Dunes, and they were like, oh, well, if Universal's actually making this series, which they're going to make individual monster movies, and then I think at the end they're going to adventure them and they're going to, going to put them together. Then there's no reason to remake Monster Squad, so the project's not happening. And everybody kind of rejoiced. But what a lot of people don't realize is the original, the first effort of Universal to make a Dark Universe was Dracula Untold. And no one knew, people saw it, but it didn't make an impact, and it wasn't a big box office smash. And so
I saw it in theaters.
Did you? Okay, yeah.
Me too.
I think the initial reaction when your movie doesn't go, but you've kind of put it out there on a limb and said, we're going to make this big thing. And then like, oh shit, no one saw the first one. I don't think people knew this was the first one. So maybe we can sneak out the next, but is Tom Cruise available? We need Tom Cruise. And that's studio mentality.
Yeah.
And that's how studios think. They think broadest audience, how we can get most eyeballs on there. They've got to, some do now, but you've got to change the perspective on it, because you can make content for smaller, nichier audiences and be successful. Because back in the day, it's like, we're putting this movie, it's really expensive to make a movie. It's giant to market a movie and to put it in theaters. It used to be very, very expensive. It's a lot cheaper now. It's still a big process for marketing and all that, but it's not like it used to be. And you just burn that cash. And most people don't realize, it's like, oh, what was the budget of this movie? It's like, oh, it was a $20 million movie. And they're like, that means you're also probably spending about $20 million on marketing it and putting it out there. So you're in the hole for 40 million. So you got to make about 60 million to, to even call yourself a success. And so they put Tom Cruise in The Mummy, which I didn't necessarily think The Mummy was bad. I thought that whole character could have been not there and you would have had a cool Mummy movie. But Tom Cruise just kind of, and I'm a huge Tom Cruise fan. Do not get me wrong. I support Tom Cruise's acting career. And I dig what he does and I dig how he does it. But The Mummy is unnecessary. Like, you didn't need to put Tom Cruise in there. And then that kind of didn't work. And so they kind of shelved it. They're like, this isn't working. But now apparently, I think they got smarts and they said, let's go smaller. Let's turn it over to the Blumhouse camp. Because Blumhouse camp knows how to make smaller movies with an impact, a small footprint, but open wide and do good stuff and get great actors and great storytellers and good directors, whether they're new or not. And let's get these storytellers all these storytellers, writers, and directors have cut their teeth on making awesome shorts or low budget genre movies that people dig. So let's give them the next step. And that's what Blumhouse kind of made their hay on, right? I mean, that's where they really made their empire with. And now they're doing it with the Dark Universe, and it's working because Lee Whannell knocked it out of the park with Invisible Man. Mm-hmm. Put people in a box. Don't give them the giant check. You'll get a much better story. You'll get a better movie.
On the subject of big budget marketing extravaganza, making sure these releases are successful, tell us about the release of Wolfman's Got Nards and how making this, getting this film out there, especially under the COVID situation, what's it been like, sort of, because we're planning on releasing this on the day that this is available on VOD. So,
fantastic. And I thank you. Look, it's been an interesting ride. Not only making the movie was a whole other story. That was an awesome, kind of experience and ride. And we had an amazing film festival run. Then it was sort of quiet for a number of reasons after our festival run. And we had some interest from a couple of things, but there was a couple of things that I can speculate what kind of cooled some interest, and then timing, and then the new year comes in, and then we go through almost the whole next year. But we had actually been in another distribution deal for about 6 months with another third party. And we had delivered the movie, we had recolored it, recut it, had it ready to go, and that deal ended up not happening. For whatever, there's reasons, but unimportant to this discussion. And so then we had to start from scratch right during the COVID thing starting. So February, we're like, oh, that deal's not happening. So what? Now we got to start from square one in a time where the entire world looks like it's going to shut down in about 3 weeks. And I actually kind of see this as a positive, because I don't think the other deal would have come out and it would not have been done at the time if the timing worked and been out and over. But I think we got lucky by teaming up with Gravitas Ventures, who is really positioned well in the VOD space and knows how to push movies in that category. They do stuff that they'll put movies everywhere theatrical. And look, we have a physical Blu-ray that you can order, which was an absolute fan requisite. It was you're not making, you have to put this out physically. And that started going gangbusters on Amazon before we even announced our release date, because that came out 2 days before it dropped on Amazon and everybody went nuts. And then we announced our release date and more people found it. And so for 2 or 3 days, we were in the top 25 on all films sold on Amazon pre-order. It's crazy. Not Prime, on physical DVD Blu-ray sales. And then we were number one in documentary and number one in special interest for the week. And we're but what is that number? I don't know that number. Is that 35 Blu-rays? Or is that 3,500 Blu-rays?
Right.
Or is it 350? You don't know. But it doesn't matter, because the screen grab that says number one in the category on Amazon is pretty bitchin'. So, releasing this thing's been a ride. Now that we finally get it out, we're doing, I enjoy talking about Wolfman's got Nards on podcast. I love coming on talking stuff like this with you guys and all the other ones that I've done and that I will do. We're getting a pretty good press coverage of it from, the regular genre press and the online media. Sci-Fi Wire just dropped, we gave them an exclusive clip from the movie that only they have. So it's kind of a little sneak peek, and they dropped that today. So, that's a big outlet. And we're doing cool things like teaming up with Grace Chan's I Heart Rudy zine. She's the one that, made a mini magazine a couple years ago called I Heart Rudy. And now she's doing volume 2, and the timing worked out good. And I said, don't release it yet. Get on the phone with me and the publicist, and let's see what we can do. And let's team up together. And I drove to the Valley, and I went to their house, and that's Sierra Nielli, who's an amazing artist and animator who did the cover art for this thing. And my publicist got it an exclusive drop on the Mary Sue, which is a giant website, but we're getting it from that angle of Grace's point of view about being a lifelong female Monster Squad fan, and she made this magazine. And so we're getting all of this really cool coverage and follow-up. And, hopefully it's what it leads to is you can only do so much, and then it's out there, and then it's up to the world. It's up to algorithms on iTunes, and it's up to, people scrolling through Dish Network and ordering your movie for, the first 60 or 90 days and hoping that they rent it or digitally download it. I know we're doing pretty, we did pretty decent on pre-orders, but I don't know exactly what decent is. I know we hit some of our milestones of what you want for algorithms to trigger. But it's a fascinating process, and I've been trying to do as much as I can and trying to be available on social media and getting the word out, but I can only do so much, the Mary Sue, but it's about getting the word out, and it's going to be sort of like Monster Squad's, kind of slow growth. I think it's going to be, if Max found this movie and liked Monster Squad, he's going to tell his friend, and then that friend's going to tell another friend and be like, hey, you should go rent this movie, at least watch it, or, you might want to collect it. And I hope that's what happens. And so that's why, I enjoy, shooting the fish with everybody and getting together and talking about anything, let alone Monster Squad or Wolfman's Got Nards, or how it ties in with, the power of film and how it impacts people. And, look, Tuesday's coming up. We got, Tuesday's here, it's like the 27th is here. And now it's out in the world. And that's always sort of that thing. You don't know. It's exciting. It's scary. Look, Fred Decker made a movie called Monster Squad, and it got out to the world, in mid-August in 1987, and no one went. And so that's always that fear. It's like, hopefully, I think this fan base is strong and robust, but and they're awesome, and they're going to eat it up, and they're going to enjoy it. But I think it's fascinating to learn and see new stuff. And look, new movies are awesome. Old movies are awesome too. And everything in between, whether it's good or big or splashy or sucky or corny or campy, just watch it. Just enjoy it. You don't have to like it. Just absorb it, because it's going to lead you to something else. And I think now that we have this, proliferation of content platforms, we've never been in a better time to see more shit than we could ever possibly see. And it's like, oh, you know what? I feel like watching Force 10 from Navarone. Bloop, there it is. Have you ever seen Force 10 from Navarone? Great movie. Follow up to Guns of Navarone. Awesome film. One of my dad and I's favorite films. So, but that was made in, 80, I think Force 10 was 83 or something. Harrison Ford and Robert Shaw and Carl Weathers. Great World War II, movie, and Where Eagles Dare, and, stuff like that, and old Gene Hackman movies that are 40, 50 years old now almost. And you can watch them in 5 seconds. And before, you'd have to wait if it was coming on a Saturday afternoon. It wasn't sure as well playing in the retro theater down, in the neighborhood or the Cineplex. So I think it's amazing now, because technology allows us to see everything. That's also the problem. Everything's out there. So what do you pick to watch? And how many of us spend 45 minutes going through the interface on Netflix to figure out what to wear? Hell, we could have already watched a movie. So I think that's part of the problem. It happens to me every time. And, my wife does it left and right. It's like, oh, let's watch something. and like it doesn't get decided on, and then here's 90 Day Fiance again. You're like, no, it
Happens every night in my apartment.
Yeah, I think about it the day of, because if I sit down at 8 o'clock and I haven't picked the movie, it's
that's exactly the way you have to do it, Nelson. Absolutely. You have to write a list and be like, and check it off. And I don't do that. And then I was like, oh, this movie's on now. I didn't know. I got to watch that because I want to see it. And I forget. You got to write it down.
Absolutely.
You got to write it down and have the discipline to watch it. But then there's so much cool stuff, new stuff that comes on. And, right now Monster Squad is getting a bunch of, push because, which is great. Because in Flanagan's Haunting of Bly Manor, there's a Monster Squad poster in the kid's bedroom.
Oh, nice.
And everybody's going, bananas about that. And, it's a series that takes place in 1987 outside of London. And this kid's got a Monster Squad poster in his room. And so I don't know if I don't know if Flanagan's a Monster Squad fan, which would be kind of rad, or if the production designer or art department was just like, we got to go to movies back from 87 and what would this kid have? So you never really know. And you don't want to assume that Flanagan's a Monster Squad fan and be like, Mike Flanagan's a Monster Squad fan. And then he tweets back, actually, I've never seen it.
Oh, no.
But I'll go with that he is a
fan. One last question, I think, to kind of wrap things up. You mentioned you've done kind of the film festival circuit, and I'm wondering if there's any fans who you didn't meet on the road to making this movie that have now come out of the woodwork, and now new fans that you've found along the way who aren't necessarily in the movie. What's that experience been like, kind of bringing those new people in?
A ton, and really where it comes from is the people that are feel nixed or missed out on are actually famous industry people that they've either seen the doc in a festival or we meet up and they're like, dude, why wasn't I in your documentary? I'm like,
funny.
What are you talking about, Joe Manganiello? And he's like, dude, I'm a huge Monster Squad fan. And I'm like, did I? It's like,
that's funny.
I actually knew Joe like years ago before he was Joe. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And I was like, we used to hang out years ago. Like, why didn't you say that then? Like, you're telling me after the fact? And I was like, do you want to sit down for an interview? He's like, oh my God, I totally want to. And then like, it didn't work because it was too late. But then he's like, my best buddy, Taron Killam, like he's a huge Monster Squad fan. Like he'll dork out and talk for hours with you about it. And I'm like, yes, please call up SNL's Taron Killam and let's go hang out and have lunch. But it's actually getting those stories from actually celebrities and filmmakers that are mad they didn't get to be in the doc to talk about Monster Squad is my favorite thing. And there's another slew of like celebs and faces that you don't know are fans because you've never met them or they contact you. And like, it's, going down the list, like Scott Ian from Anthrax is a huge Monster Squad fan.
Oh, funny.
He wears the Stephen King Rules t-shirt while he's playing arena concert.
That's
and I'm like, that's
incredible.
Awesome. Keenan Thompson is a Monster Squad fan, and I just want to meet. I've never met him. I want to meet and hang him. It's kid actor vibe kind of conversations we could have.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you kind of the end all be all, my favorite Monster Squad fan. And what's interesting, it doesn't matter who they are. And even kind of the celebs and recognizable faces in Wolfman's Got Nards, they aren't there because they're celebrity. They're on camera because they're Monster Squad fans.
Right.
Doesn't matter what doesn't matter it's Seth Green or, Zack Ryder or Adam F. Goldberg. They're talking about Monster Squad because they're fans first. Yeah. And then they became who they are later.
Yeah.
My favorite Monster Squad fan is Ryan Gosling.
Oh wow!
Cool.
I know he's a big Haunted Mansion fan, so that doesn't surprise me actually.
Yeah,
I know
he's got his band, he's got his
uh-huh.
music group, Dead Man's Bones, and I was trying at some point. I really wanted Dead Man's Bones to do the score for the documentary.
Oh, that would have been amazing.
That would have been really neat. But our score is actually done by a guy who actually is a fan. It's like he provided soundtrack and score, so everything in this doc is touched by people. They have a connection to it some way. And the cool, moody instrumental stuff is his, and the actual songs that you hear lyrics are actually from Ryan Lambert's two bands.
Oh, cool.
That's
So
cool.
Ryan Lambert's
Mhm.
fans, were
Yeah.
gracious enough to provide me. So we keep it all in the family.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's super
But yeah,
cool.
I had never met Ryan Gosling, and we ended up being in the same coffee shop, in Hollywood one time, and I just walked up to him and interrupted his, soup with his buddy, and his buddy's like, "Fuck, dude." I'm like, "Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to say, you and I have a mutual friend," and he's like, "Oh yeah, who's that?" I was like, "Shane Black." He's like, "Oh yeah, Shane's my man." I was like, "No, I know," and Shane and I have been friends for a very long time. And I'm just kind of hoping it sinks in there, and it's not happening. Sometimes it doesn't happen because they're not thinking anything about it. And these two guys are just like going, "Who is this guy interrupting us at dinner?" And I said, and I've also, read, I understand that you're a Monster Squad fan. And he's like, "Hell yeah, Wolfman's Got Nards. That's my jam, man. I love it. Wolfman's Got Nards." And now he's getting energetic and louder. Like people are looking. I was like, "Settle down. Like don't, like you're sitting with your back to it. Like don't let anybody know Ryan Gosling's at the coffee shop." And he's like, "Yeah, man, I love Wolfman's Got Nards." I'm like, he's like, "Yeah, it's the best line ever." I'm like, and it's not, and I had to lean in, and I was like, "My name's Andre Gower. It's good to meet you. I was actually the lead in the Monster Squad." And he's like, "Holy shit!" And then like we remember talking, and his buddy, I don't even remember who it was. It was probably like Jeremy Renner or something. I don't know. And he's saying, this guy's like, "What is happening?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "I'm really sorry, but enjoy your fries. If they're cold, I'll get you some more. My bad." But Ryan and I just talked for like 3 minutes, and I was like, he's like, "Oh my god, this is amazing." And I was like, "Actually, I'm working on a project. I love, it's a documentary. I'd love to sit down and talk to you at time." He's like, "Yeah." And like, I gave him my card, and then like, the next year was like impossible. So it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have Ryan Gosling on camera talking about Wolfman's Got Nards. But, maybe, in the YouTube series, Wolfman's Got Nards, just get Gosling to sit down. But I love the fact that all these awesome people, are fans of Monster Squad. And it's interesting because it opens doors and you get to meet cool people just because of that. And so that's definitely a value. And one of my, it just happened I didn't just meet them the other day, but it's now the movie's about to come out and we're sending out screeners, and we want people to talk about it, and on podcasts. And I don't know if you've seen Host yet, it's on Shudder, but Host is, the movie that made it in pandemic.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
It's a writing team, and one of the writing team was Jed Shepard. And now like Host blew up. Like Host is like the biggest thing on the planet right now. And it really is a good movie.
Yeah, it's a really cool movie.
It's really well done, especially, all through Zoom and, on camera, great digital effects, well put together, great idea. And Jed Shepard happens to be this Monster Squad fan. And so like, he followed me and was like, "Holy shit, Andre Gower, followed me back." I'm like, "No, I just followed the dude that wrote a really cool movie." And I didn't know. And so we could kind of DM back and forth and just meet in that regard. And I hit him up with, I was like, "Hey man, I was just wondering, now's the time, since, we got a couple days left. I'm actually sending out I'm sending out a screener link, with a private password would you like a sneak peek of the doc before it drops?" And he's like, "Oh my God, I totally would." And I was like, "That'd be amazing. If you want to talk about it, great. No obligation. This is cool for me to personally share it with you." And he's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And the same thing happened with Scott Beck and Brian Woods, who wrote A Quiet Place, which
wow,
is a fantastic film.
Yeah.
Great story, great concept, great screenplay. I thought
movie.
Krasinski directed the shit out of that movie.
Yeah.
It just had what a great movie. I really think it was one of the best movies in the last couple of years. And then like we connected on Twitter, and I asked them if they want to say it. They're like, yeah, we like, absolutely. Yeah. And so you get to meet people because of this movie that people love, that's 100 years old now. But it's amazing still to connect. It doesn't matter who you are. They're all connected to this movie, and we can all be pals, whether it's Scott Ian from Anthrax or, Jared Anderson. It doesn't matter. All those people are exactly the same and equal in sort of this context. And that's what's fun. That's what's kind of unique and enjoyable about this whole thing.
Amazing. Super cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Awesome.
so much, Andre.
Mhm.
No, yeah, I'll probably, tuck your ear off. I should let you guys go do the rest of your day.
No, it was a great interview. Thank you.
that was
I
great.
have
Yeah,
I have
thank
a
you so
tendency to
much.
rant and go on tangents, but
All good.
it's fun telling stories and hanging out. Where is everybody at? Jared, where are you?
I'm in Seattle right now, and I just want to say it was an honor to be compared to Scott Ian. He was actually playing bass at the last concert I went to before the pandemic, which was Mr. Bungle.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I actually met with Jasper and Nelson, who I know from SoCal. And it's actually funny because your doc has like a clip of you going to a screening at a film class in Cal State Fullerton.
Yes.
And we met at Chapman University, which is like very, very close to there.
I know Chapman, yes.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So
but I live in Seattle right now.
Who's all, is everybody Chapman? Who's Chapman?
3 of us are. Max is
Me,
not.
Nelson, and Jared.
Mhm. I'm from Kentucky. I live here right now, and we
Right.
just met online through a Letterboxd. It's like a movie review site. We met through there. Just sort of bonding over
okay.
movie stuff.
You're in Paris. Is that right? You're in Paris, Kentucky.
I'm in Lexington, so right
you're-
outside of Paris. It's like 20 minutes from Paris.
Yes, and it's just not for sales, so
Yeah.
it's okay. See, and
Yeah.
I know my Kentucky. I know
Yeah,
my
you
Kentucky.
do.
I love Lexington.
Oh, wow.
it's, all downtown's been redone in the last 10 years.
Yeah, it looks
great.
really
So
amazing right
I
now.
love horse farm country. Get a hot brown, and
Yeah.
it's great.
Mhm.
I actually
you go.
love Kentucky. I like Louisville too.
Yeah.
And Jasper, where are you? Where are you now?
So I'm actually in Napa Valley, but
Oh,
I just moved here
yes.
2 weeks ago.
Perfect timing for the fires.
Exactly. Well, I'll not get into the long story about the fires, but
Right.
but yeah, it's my first time living out of Southern California for the first time ever. So my girlfriend got a job
Okay.
up here, and my bosses I've been working remotely for the last 7 months now. So they're just like,
Napa.
yeah, go for it.
Look, Napa's it's kind of awesome. It's a neat.
It's
part,
gorgeous. Yeah, it's super.
Despite
super
the
gorgeous.
current climate. And Nelson, where are you?
I'm in LA. Yeah, I've lived
You're-
here about 5 years, and funnily enough, the way this all came about is I worked on another Gravitas Ventures documentary called Ski Bum, the Warren Miller story,
Oh yeah. Okay.
which similarly had a sort of odd distribution thing happen, ended up on Gravitas, and then so now then when we're working on this podcast, and I see that they're releasing a documentary about Monster Squad, and we had just recorded a Monster Squad episode, and I was like, oh, let's do an episode on the doc, and so.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I enjoy it anyway, even if it doesn't help. But it can only help, your podcast, hopefully, and hopefully it helps the documentary get the word out there with your people.
For sure.
Guys, I've had a blast. If you ever have a cancellation and need some dipshit to fill in or something, let me know. And we'll talk about
We'll
other
take you up on that.
cool movies or anything like that. Yeah, please do enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like hit me up, let me know, stay in touch, and
Will do.
I appreciate you inviting me on, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks
so
so
much,
much, Andre.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Andre.
thank you so much. It was
Take it easy.
awesome.
Take it
All right,
easy.
we appreciate it. Have a good one.
Wolfman's got Nards.